Emotions. Previously, the necessity of being able to find fault with one's thoughts, and not identify with them, was covered, so now we can speak of the need to find fault with our emotions. The activities of emotional center are more difficult to become passive to than the activities of the intellectual center. A person can think differently more easily than they can feel differently. It is quite possible to become passive to many thoughts that we have grown accustomed to following and identifying with, but it is not the same with regard to the sphere of our emotions and feelings. The reason is that we are identified with our feelings, far more than with our thoughts. Our feelings, our emotions, our moods, they grip us. Notice yourself, when you are vexed. Is it easy to non-identify with this daily emotional state? We may smile and say cheerful things, pretend that everything is right, but inside we are held as in a vice. Although one side of us may not want to be vexed, yet some other side insists on being so. Or let's say that something belonging to self-importance, to vanity, and self-image is touched. Is it easy to cease being identified with it? Is it easy not to be offended? One reason is that our emotions are very fast. They work with extremely incandescent energy, a far quicker energy than that used in ordinary thoughts. Another reason is that we rarely examine our emotions. We do not observe them because we take them for granted. Our emotional life is a very poor thing. But we do not notice how impoverished, how unpleasant and mean it is. If we did, we would begin to dislike it. We would begin to dislike our usual emotional states, perhaps even to begin to hate them. However, it takes considerable time before we reach this stage of consciousness. It is scarcely too much to say that we are not really conscious of our day-to-day emotions, which are practically always negative, mean, jealous and paltry, or in short, unpleasant. Our love of unpleasant emotions is extraordinary, and we take perverse enjoyment not only in communicating our unpleasant emotions to others to infect them, but also to hear about unpleasant things, scandal and drama. We do not know what we are doing, because we do it all in a sense of sleep. We cannot see our emotions because we are so identified with them. If we could plainly see our emotions, we'd be horrified. But fortunately we are not able to see them, simply because we could not endure it. It would drive us into madness to see the quality of our emotional life, and we'd become untethered. We all have noble pictures of ourselves. And the work never allows us to see what we cannot bear, therefore its action is very slow, very gradual and even gentle. However, we can see the results of our emotions, which is a starting point. For example, we can see that we hurt people. But even if we realize this, it may take years of self-observation before we realize that we have unpleasant, treacherous or nasty emotions, which cause others to be hurt, and that it's our fault. We must understand that awakening is a very long and a painful process. Awakening means becoming more and more conscious of oneself, of what we are really like. In the emotional sphere, this is very difficult. How often do people imagine that they have done their best for others, when in actual fact, they have done nothing but express their unpleasantness, their most stinging and harmful, often nastiest emotions, of which they should really be ashamed. In fact, expressing unpleasant emotions is what in life is often called being sincere or trying to help, and so on. People actually think it is a kindness to say all sorts of hurtful and wretched things to one another, and then imagine that if they smile sweetly they are exercising charity and goodwill. That is the trouble with regard to our emotional states. We are not charitable, nor have we goodwill, and one of the first things is to realize this to the very bottom, and then dislike it. We love ourselves in everything. We love everything that gratifies our vanity, and so we do not love our neighbors, unless they flatter or agree with us. And then we feel that we dispense their lives. Even though we may have better eyes in us that can understand other people more, perhaps even care for them, even if they do not flatter us, yet the smaller, meaner eyes belonging to self-love, the self-interest and self-conceit usually prove to be far stronger. Save perhaps after a long interval of self-observation, or when we are rendered quiescent by the exhaustion of severe illness, which renders our personality passive. On the point of death, people wish only that others should forgive them, which is because they are no longer in small eyes. This humiliation and humbling experience can gradually take place through the action of the work, through increasing consciousness of what we are really like, by means of long and patient self-observation. Then all the inner pain of realizing that life cannot be as it has been in our imagination. Let's imagine a person who is full of vanity, self-merit, self-admiration, self-love, self-estimation, self-worthiness, self-conceit, self-importance, self-esteem, self-excitement, and so on. This person is very identified with themselves. This person is rich, the rich mentioned in the Gospels. Such people have no idea that they cannot do. This idea would startle them. They also have no notion that they do not know. They are sure they know best. They feel depressed only when their vanity meets with a check, perhaps they even feel furious. But they cannot see themselves. They may be very kind, so long as they are gratified with thanks and praise in return. They help the poor, give money to those in distress, provided they get proper recognition, and feel they are ennobled by the experience. Such people may be very useful in mechanical life, however in the work, which is under a reverse sign from life, they find themselves at a loss. Many years ago, some individuals of this type were engaged in the work, and decided to get together then make the work really go. They felt that it was all too slow and that they could rapidly make it a great success. They no doubt pictured themselves sitting on a platform at some great meeting in the Albert or Carnegie Hall, some such esteemed location, bowing to thousands of people. They felt that out of their richness, speaking psychologically, they could enlarge the work. However, it is out of a person's poverty that the work grows. It is not from rich ego that work grows in a person, but from our starved and very real essence. This is why the work reverses everything, and makes the active passive, the passive active. Does anyone really imagine that if this work were such a great success in life, then broadcast from the steeples and minarets night and day, that it could retain any inner secret force and meaning? Reason this out yourself, then realize that this work could never be a success in life, and that it can never become a bestseller, save indirectly. Then if we think deep enough, we will see why this must be so. If we think from the idea of active and passive signs, with regard to personality and essence. Let's now take the question of becoming passive to likes and dislikes. This is part of the work on emotional center, with regard to the general teaching of becoming passive to the active oneself that takes charge of things, and controls us. Try to observe your likes and dislikes, then how you waste yourself in petty likes and dislikes. There is an exercise in the work to this effect. Try for a time to like what you dislike and dislike what you like. Being identified with one's mechanical liking and disliking holds a person down to emotional habits. It so often happens that we find that what we dislike, we can easily like, and vice versa. Our mechanical likes and dislikes are based upon very little. They change every moment. Yet we attach so much importance to them. Often in this work we find that people we disliked, we begin to like. This is a sign that we are changing. But we cannot change if we identify with every one of our momentary likes and dislikes. One thing can help, namely not always talking endlessly of our likes and dislikes, then making a fuss about them. Sometimes people's sole form of conversation is about what they like, and what they do not like. As if they really imagine it is important. No form of talk is more egotistical or exhausting to listen to. To practice for a short time, at intervals, being consciously passive to one's mechanical likes and dislikes, is very useful, but not always so, particularly in those who mechanically are too timid to say what they want. Speaking in general, work is always against what is mechanical in us. If mechanically, we have insufficient likes and dislikes, then we should have more, and vice versa. Let's then speak from one side of being passive to likes and dislikes, then speak of being passive to associations. We know that this work says that we see everything from association. Yet we may have feelings of being in a familiar place, and of being in an unfamiliar place at the same time, however those feelings are not in the same part of us. To our small eyes, living in mechanical divisions of centers, things may seem familiar, by mere association, which when seen from more conscious eyes, become unfamiliar. Thus we sometimes behold one another, as for the first time. That epiphany or lightbulb moment of revelation. We see for a moment without associations and impressions, then fall beyond the machinery of mechanical personality. Everything suddenly becomes strange, unfamiliar, and vivid as impressions then fall on essence. We get used to things owing to association, so no longer see one another or indeed anything, but only our associations with which we completely identify. We take another person by our associations. We identify with these associations, and so think we see and know the person. It is quite possible to observe associations at work with which we identify, and so get misled. It is quite possible to observe associations about others, particularly if one begins to realize that we do not really know them at all. For instance, people take it for granted that they know each other, which is an illusion. We are nearly invisible to one another. But if you think you know, then you will not be able to see without mechanical associations. This means that you must start from the realization that you do not know other people, however familiar to you they are, and so too with everything else. We do not really know, however we are convinced that we know. Start from the assumption that you do not know, and have never known. Start, that is, from ignorance. This is the poor side. And this gives new life, because we begin to receive new impressions, new viewpoints, and new understanding. This is the empty cup of Confucius. If impressions fall on essence, then we see in a new way. Therefore a rich person, very identified with themselves, cannot expect to see things without association, or to get any new impressions falling on essence, which is the growing point of a person. They will live always in associations, in the past. An opinionated person, one convinced that they know right from wrong, a narcissistic individual openly or secretly in love with themselves, who is certain of themselves, of their virtue and of their standpoint, such an individual, wholly identified with ego, will not be able to divide themselves into two. They will not be able to shift their position, but always remain where they are, and so what they are in the scale of being. Where and what are the same in this scale? That is, the level of being where a person is also precisely what they are. If we begin to see ourselves passively, then we begin to see the level of being that we are chained down to, by the active, self-acting side in us, the side that calls itself I, which in my case expects to be called me. This side in everyone usurps the throne and sits upon it. There are endless legends, parables, and myths, referring to this wrong psychological situation of mankind. We have difficulty in believing that such a thing actually happens to everyone, and that everyone has a wrong ruler on the throne, that this happened long ago to oneself. We at least think that we are master of our own home. Which is precisely not the case. We have no real master on the throne of our inner world, in our own psychology. We must understand that if we see everything from past associations, then we will not be able to see anything in a different way. We may imagine we see another person, but it will be from our old associations. In this way, we keep one another in the prison of our associations about each other. We have already formed our own opinions about others. So do not allow others to exist beyond what we think of them by association. This is a great tragedy. To let people go, as it were, let them be different, depends upon our letting them go. That is, it depends upon our not trying to keep them to what we imagine they are, by our mechanical associations. All mothers and fathers have this difficulty with their children. However, it applies to all sorts of other relationships in life too. Remember that we see one another by association, once we become familiar, as it is called, with each other. What we do not understand is that seeing a person by one's own associations with them has nothing to do with what that person really is. So try to see another person without associations. This is the beginning of something new. As it so often happens, people have quite the wrong association of others, then never really catch a real glimpse of them. I personally have found in this work that I know others less and less. Certainly I would never say, I know this person, I have known this person all my life. That is exactly saying in so many words, that we actually know nothing, save our few associations of that person. One of the most difficult things in this work is to go on steadily with it, when our vanity has taken a hard knock. This simply shows how much we do things from vanity, without realizing it. All the explosive, bristling, quarreling touchiness of life is due to those two emotional giants, vanity and pride. Can you stick to something when you have been told that you are not very good at it? Your vanity may be offended, but your pride may help. If you can, then you may be fairly sure that you are not acting from personality entirely, but perhaps from something more genuine, something deeper and more real. Yet it may only be pride, turned outwards, which comes to the rescue of offended vanity. At the same time, one can stick to this work through pride turned inwards, then eventually find genuine reasons which have nothing to do with superficial feeling, but spring from a real valuation of the work itself. This is to reach emotion beyond self-emotion, or to acquire emotional maturity. We must remember that in a fuller developed school of this work, our vanity would be hit almost daily, and many would leave in indignation. At the Gurdjieff Institute in France, students were told on entering that personality had scarcely any right to exist in that place. However, the words were merely heard and few realized what it meant, save later. Speaking on a far higher scale, let's recall how many people left Christ because they were offended by him. This means they were identified emotionally with the vanity of their own self-worth. To be so is really a nuisance, and we can find this out for ourselves, if we do not know it already. However, there is a deeper side to all this, which is where the work really brings us up against ourselves, and here lies the point at which people forget to work, but simply feel lost. Here is the place where it is possible, or to desire to not be so identified emotionally with what we really are. It is like being stuck to an illusion that you cannot get away from, and that can no longer galvanize you. We must, however, begin to realize that we have been stuck to an illusion that we've called I, and that beyond this illusion one can begin to have real things, the same things, only differently. Take finally another aspect of being identified emotionally, which illustrates one of the many difficulties of becoming passive to oneself, to this person called a, to this active Frankenstein that one has been led to form, which now stalks about in one's little world, then takes charge of things, and speaks as if it were I, keeps singing all sorts of songs, grandiloquent and boastful as well as pious and timid. This monster, this machine, that we are fastened to, what do you think of it? Do you like it? Everyone is attached to their mechanicalness, so remember the work teaches that everyone is a machine, but that machines are of different types. Some are loud like machine guns, or chattering like keyboards, and some are as silent as the electric meter on the wall outside your home. People compare themselves with others, machines compare themselves with other machines, and identify through comparison of models, with themselves. If you are a noisy machine, you perhaps feel that you are superior to a quiet machine. And if you are a quiet machine, you thank God that you are not a noisy machine, and so on. This is one source of identifying emotionally with oneself, it is one source of liking oneself. In the Gospels it is said that we must come to hate ourselves. This work uses different language but has the same depth of meaning. The work says that one must become passive to oneself. However, this is very painful to go against the usual way one has reacted to life. We feel that we are losing so much, yet are losing nothing real, and after a time begin to feel new forms of living passing into us. We come back to the same scenes, but we are somehow different. It is the same outer world, but we take it quite differently. It is the same kind of thing, the same kind of events, but we are related to them quite differently. It is even the same people, but we see and feel them quite differently. In passing from one level of being and experience to a new level, there is a gap that is painful. It is like leaving something familiar. If we hold on to the work, after a time we'll discover that we can once more experience everything fully, but at a different level, in a new way.